Pennyfine59 made a comment in one of my previous budget meal videos that stuck in my mind. She said, "You also need to add your gas to the price of making these meals." With that in mind, I decided to cut my price tag in half. Instead of $10, I was going to use $5, and I was going to make 6 meals from the Dollar Tree. So let's go do it. Welcome back to Rachel Resets, where we reset your budget using budget-friendly meals. I've got my $5 bill, let's go in a Dollar Tree. And here I've got my haul. We only bought 4 ingredients because that's what $5 buys at Dollar Tree nowadays. I got beef patties, I got flour, a box of instant mashed potatoes, and a bag of the frozen stir-fry blend. 4 ingredients, but 6 meals for 1 person. Can we do it? Here are our freebies: minced garlic, soy sauce, sesame oil, bouillon cube, butter, and oil. For our spices, we're using salt, pepper, chopped onion, which I got the chopped onion also from Dollar Tree, thyme, basil, sage, Cajun seasoning, and cayenne pepper, which is optional. If you have milk and you're wanting to add it to your mashed potatoes, you may want to do so. The first thing I did was sort out our veggies. For our choices, we have carrots, a random assortment of bits and pieces, about 2 slices of pepper, a little bit of broccoli, and these snap peas. We got more carrots and snap peas than anything else. I divided our veggies into each meal, so the first meal we're making is this carrot gnocchi. Next, we're going to be making a broccoli pasta with mini meatballs, then a shepherd's pie. Then we're going to be using these snap peas for a green bean volcano. We're going to make some potato pierogies. Hey, we didn't have peas. Well, yes we did. We opened up these snap green beans and we actually found some peas inside, and the peas are actually really soft and sweet, not bullets. Lastly, we'll make some beef gyoza. First up, we're going to start on our carrot gnocchi. First, we're making our mashed potatoes. We're going to use 1/3 of a cup of these potato flakes. Then we're going to add in 1/3 cup of boiling water, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and a tablespoon of butter. I'm roughly following the recipe on the back for about 1 serving, so I'm cutting that recipe in half. The box says it has 8 1/2 cup servings. I think it's closer to being able to serve 6 people, so that's what I've split it up over during this meal prep. Again, if you were wanting to add milk, Dollar Tree does sell milk. It just didn't really fit in the budget, and I don't really feel like I miss it, so I didn't add it. Now, if you did have it in the budget, I know Dollar Tree does sell gnocchi. It's just, I was trying to make it from scratch and see how many things I could make with just flour and mashed potatoes that weren't just flour and mashed potatoes. We went ahead and mixed all our ingredients together and got this soft ball, and you're going to roll it across the back of the tines of your fork, and you're going to get these little ridges on it. They look pretty close to the gnocchi that you would get in the package. If you find the dough is sticking to each other or to your hands, make sure you flour your hands. I also learned later on why I should lay these out on a sheet pan instead of in a cup, but more on that later. Now I went ahead and got a pot boiling full of water that I added about 1/4 teaspoon of salt into it, just to salt that water and add more flavor to the gnocchi. Now we're going to get to work on our carrots, which we cut into matchsticks. And we're going to get started on our brown butter sauce. We're going to use 2 tablespoons of butter, which will melt in the pan. And we're also going to add on 1/4 teaspoon of garlic, minced garlic. I put the garlic on top of the pat of butter so that the garlic wouldn't burn. I've divided up our ground beef into 6 different sections, and we're going to add one of the smallest sections into this dish. Now, the ground beef does come with 2 patties, so it's about 1/8 of a cup that we're adding into this dish. Next, we're going to go ahead and add in our chopped onions. Now, the recipes for all of these dishes is going to be below, as well as any tweaks I might have made to the recipes. I think in one of the wonton recipes later on, I did forget salt, so I made sure that the recipe actually has it in it. Next, we're adding in our carrots. If there was one item you could splurge on, I would say get higher quality ground beef. Or ground turkey if your family likes it. And here is where you see my issue. Everything stuck together. That's why I would tweak it to lay everything out on a sheet pan instead. Add salt and pepper to your sauce. Now you can see the gnocchi has all popped up to the surface. That means they're done. It took about 5 minutes. Now I just stirred everything until everything was well coated. And here is our finished plate. We had plenty of flour left, so you could actually make more gnocchi if this isn't enough to satisfy. I love the pop of color, and one thing I would advise is don't overcook your veggies. It adds a nice crunch if you don't overcook them because they're already a little parboiled. They really don't need to be cooked to death. I also chopped up some green onions just for a little pop of color. These were free from my garden, but I'll link my video below where I show you how to grow them from trash that would otherwise have been thrown away. Now we're making broccoli pasta with mini meatballs. We're going to be using another pat of our sectioned off ground beef, about 1/8 a cup. We're putting it in a bowl just because we're going to be mixing several ingredients and spices in order to make these meatballs. We're using some sage, a little splash of cayenne, some of these chopped onion flakes, and also about a tablespoon of our mashed potato flakes. Mashed potato flakes are a nice gluten-free alternative to using breadcrumbs. Again, if you have the money and you don't want to make meatballs, I know Dollar Tree does sell meatballs, but since we're doing this on a shoestring, I went ahead and just used the meat I had and made my own. I added salt and pepper into the mixture and just gave it a good mash up until I had a good consistency, and I made these little mini meatballs. I turned all of that meat into mini meatballs. I went ahead and heated up a tablespoon of butter in a pan. Then I added in some basil, which started to get aromatic as it browned in that butter. This smelled so good. I love herbs and butter. It smells good. Next, I went ahead and dumped in all of my mini meatballs. As you can see, it made quite a few. I stirred these around and made sure they got browned on all sides. And while these were browning, I went ahead and chopped up the broccoli into smaller pieces. I added in some minced garlic. I really like minced garlic. It's a cheap way to add a lot of flavor to your meals. Then I added in my chopped up broccoli. I gave all of this a good mix until everything was well coated with the butter. Then I set this aside so I could get to work on our noodles. I went ahead and measured out a cup of flour, 1/4 a teaspoon of salt, and I also added in 1/4 of a cup of boiling water. The water is going to help activate that gluten and help it to be stretchy and for the noodles to hold together really well. Mix this up with a fork until it's cooled enough so that you can touch it, and then you'll combine it until it forms this nice pliable dough. I will list this recipe as the wrapper recipe because we'll be using it for about 2 or 3 other of our meals in different ways. Go ahead and flour your surface, then take pieces of your dough, roll it out until it's really thin, and use a pizza cutter just to cut this into strips or whatever shape you would like your noodles to be. Drop the noodles a few at a time into boiling water and make sure and stir it so that the noodles don't clump together. As you can see, the noodles are starting to make the water a little cloudy and thicker because of the gluten in the flour. We're going to add in 1 crushed up instant bouillon cube. This is going to add a lot of flavor to our sauce. Next, we're going to add in our meatballs and buttered broccoli, and we're going to stir everything together. This is one meal that would be served best the first day because by the second day the noodles might have thickened a little bit more and maybe just clumped together a little bit more. If they do clump together, add a teaspoon of water and that should help them to separate once more when you're reheating it. I am a pasta girl, so this is really delicious and hits the spot, and it's just a very comforting meal. Now we're going to make a 1-person shepherd's pie. I'm going to go ahead and measure out some flour. Next, we're going to slice in about 2 tablespoons of cold butter. You're going to slice it in using your fork or your knife until you have small chunks like this. I also added a pinch of salt and 2 tablespoons of water and then mixed it until I had a nice dough. Once my pie crust dough had come together, I went ahead and pressed it into a small pan I had. I'm going to use this small Corelle dish as my pie pan. Then I took my fork and I crimped the sides just by pressing it up against the sides. It just makes a nice little design. There's not a major intention for using the fork. I preheated the oven to 375 degrees and I chopped up my random veggies into small pieces. Next, I put in my pie crust. I ended up baking it for about 20 minutes. but you'll know when it's ready when it's just a little bit brown. I added in 1/8 of a cup of my ground beef and a tablespoon of butter, and then I also added in another crushed up bouillon cube. I also made this thickener using 1/4 cup of water and a teaspoon of flour that I had dissolved into it. You want to dissolve the flour into the water, otherwise you'll have a lot of clumps in your sauce. And you want that water to be cold, not hot. Then I gave it a good mix and it almost immediately started thickening. I went ahead and added in my veggies. I tried to cook the veggies as little as possible so I wouldn't miss out on all of the beautiful colors and the crunch that they add to the dish. I mixed everything all together, and now we're ready to start on the mashed potato topping. I used the same mashed potato recipe that I used to make the gnocchi mashed potatoes, except for I used a little more water. I also went ahead and added in a little bit of minced garlic. I like a good garlicky mashed potato, so I added some of that in. My pie crust came out of the oven looking nice and golden, so I went ahead and started to spoon in the mashed potatoes into the base. I used about half of them. Then I went ahead and spooned in all of my veggies, and as you can see, it's such a nice color. I really hated to cover them all the way up, so I just kind of put the mashed potatoes in the middle and spread them out just a little, but you can still see the veggies around the edges and you can still see that vibrant color coming through. Then I went ahead and turned my broiler on high and popped this back in the oven. The crust started to brown a lot faster than the mashed potatoes. My mashed potatoes are still pretty white, but they will taste good. And I went ahead and chopped up a few of these green onions again with my kitchen shears just to add a little pizzazz, but it doesn't really add too much. I just like it a lot. This pie crust is nice and tender, and it pairs really well with the mashed potatoes and that ground beef mixture, and the crunch from the veggies is just divine. Now let's make a green bean volcano. This didn't originally start out as this recipe, but you will see what happened when I tried to make my original hope for this recipe. I started out with some ground beef again, some chopped onion. I've been pretty impressed with the Dollar Tree spices so far. I added a pat of butter, about a tablespoon, and then I just slivered up my green beans, kind of French style, on a diagonal. I was super impressed with these green beans actually. They had a lot of sweetness, a lot of flavor, and a lot of crunch in this dish. Here are all of my green beans all sliced up. I'm going to go ahead and add in some thyme. This thyme really brings out a lot of flavor in this meal. I added just under 1/4 teaspoon. And I also added in that thickener again, the 1/4 cup of water with the teaspoon of flour that I had mixed into it. I added in some salt and some pepper. Then I went ahead and popped in my green beans. I didn't cook these for very long. I literally just mixed them in and they were ready. And here's where everything kind of fell apart. You see, I was planning on making a tater tot casserole, making homemade tater tots using mashed potatoes rolled up in mashed potato flakes. However, what I did not realize is when you roll up mashed potatoes in mashed potato flakes and then you try to deep fry them, they just kind of disintegrate. They turn into nothing. So I had like just little bits and pieces, and I decided I was gonna just switch gears. I was gonna just make mashed potatoes, which I had plenty of. So I made this whole mountain of mashed potatoes and put a fountain, a volcano if you will, of green beans and that browned ground beef out of it. And I still have plenty of mashed potatoes left, which is what led me to my next recipe. Ironically, what began as a mess turned into one of my favorite dishes. Next, we're going to be making potato pierogies. Now these are going to have a little bit of a Cajun flair to it because we're going to be using some Cajun seasoning, and the wrapper is not quite the normal potato pierogi wrapper that you would be using because we don't have eggs. But I went ahead and used my same recipe and made that dough that I rolled out then with my rolling pin. And then I just spooned on a few tablespoons of that mashed potato that I had just shown you and sprinkled on some Cajun seasoning, a few of those peas, a little more potato, a little more of the seasoning, and then I went ahead and closed it up. And when I closed it up, I tried to make sure extra carefully that I pinched those edges, because otherwise it'll open up when we're frying it. And just for an added flair of design, I went ahead and crimped the edges with a fork. While I was finishing making these, I went ahead and heated up some oil. It's that same oil that became a mess on the stove earlier, and I didn't want it to go to waste, so I went ahead and made these pierogies in it. As you can see, they came out golden brown. The recipe ended up making 3 fairly large pierogies, and I really enjoyed the pop of color that the peas added inside of them. I'm gonna split one in half so that you can see what I'm talking about here. But these were delicious. They were one of the things that I sat and like snacked a little bit on while I was making the later recipes in this video, and they were delightful. These make a really handy snack on the go or lunch on the go if you're needing to drive and eat or walk and eat. The peas add a little bit of protein, but I know this one is not our protein heaviest. This meal is our protein heaviest. It's the beef gyoza. I'm gonna go ahead and chop up my remaining carrots. I didn't have very many left, but I did have 2 of these large cubes of ground beef left, so that's what I'm going to be using for the filling for the gyoza. I went ahead and started smushing the ground beef together. I added in about a teaspoon of soy sauce. I also added in a little bit of sesame seed oil. This is optional, but I feel like it adds so much flavor that if you can have it in your cupboard, it's a really great way to dress up a really cheap meal. Next, I took my remaining wonton wrappers or dough that I had used for the pierogies. This time we're going to be steaming it though, so it's going to have a much different texture than the pierogies would. I went ahead and spooned on a heaping tablespoon to 2 tablespoons into each of these wrappers that I rolled out rather thinly, and then I folded over those edges just to make sure they were sealed, and I used a fork to crimp them. You could also do like a pleated fold on these just to close these up and make them look a little more like the traditional gyoza that you might see in a restaurant. I thought I would include this bonus snack option of wonton crisp. Sometimes you get those egg noodles or the crispy egg noodles at different Chinese restaurants, and this is similar to them. I went ahead and just took the remaining of the wonton wrapper dough that I had left and rolled it out and sliced it, and you'll see later on I just fry it up until it's golden brown, and they turned out really nice and crispy. Now these wontons, I went ahead and covered the bottom of the pan with oil. Again, it's that oil that kind of flopped earlier, and I'm just reusing it for all these recipes because it's there, and I didn't really use it for much of anything other than to kind of make a flop of that one recipe. So we're gonna go ahead and we fried these gyoza for about 3 minutes on either side until both sides were a little bit golden brown, and then I went ahead and added in 1/4 cup of water into the pan and covered it. That way they could steam and soften up. I took it off halfway, the lid off halfway through, and flipped them so that they could steam on the other side for another 3 minutes, so a total of about 6 minutes steaming. Now they are ready to eat, and I'm working on these wonton wrappers, which I just popped into the oil and let crisp up. Now if you want them to be thinner and more tender, you're going to want to roll that dough out really thin. If you want them thicker and with more of a crunch, then you're going to want a slightly thicker dough. I was tired at this point, so I kind of just whatever rolled out was rolled. And now, as you can see, we had a fair amount of flour left, so meaning that you could make this dish as your go-to snack for the entire week. This is what my plate looks like. As you can see, it's fairly full. It made a lot of those gyoza. I added those green onions again on top, which I really love the flavor of, and I like the color. The color gets me every time. So I was very impressed with this meal and how easy it was to throw together and how delicious it was. I am a sucker for good gyoza, so I am very happy that I know how to make it myself now. And you can see our wontons here look really delicious. You could dip all of this in some soy sauce and it would be very tasty. And here we have my finished week of meals. I packaged them up for my work. I hope this meal plan has been really helpful for you in case you need a budget reset today. And if you are needing more meal inspiration, check out one of my other videos. I'll see you in the next one.